Hey, what's up guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide. Today I want to talk about the PDP gaming controller for the Xbox Series consoles and for PC. This is a wired controller, so there's no Bluetooth in it. I was running around Best Buy this weekend, and I wasn't specifically looking for a controller, but I happened to run across the gaming aisle, and I found this controller. Online, it sells for $34.99. They had it on sale for $10 off, so I only paid $25 for this controller. And if you look at it, it is beautiful looking. It has a really nice aesthetic to it. And surprisingly, it has a bunch of features, which we'll get into later. There's some software functionality and all kinds of things. Now, I normally don't buy third-party controllers. I always buy the official first-party controllers, but in this case, I had to check it out because the price was so low and it had a lot of functionality that surprised me in a controller for this price point. You might be asking yourself, why would you want a wired controller? Well, I want something specifically for my gaming PC. You see, in a living room setup, you want everything to be wireless, obviously, because you have about 6 to 7 feet between your TV and the couch, but when you're in an office and you're playing on a gaming PC, it's right in front of you. So I'd rather save myself from having to change the batteries every few weeks or every month and just plug it in. You also get less latency that way, and again, because this is going to be permanently attached to my gaming computer, I'm not going to use it with my Xbox, it's right in front of me. So this is the controller itself. It comes in a really tiny box. I got the Phantasm Red model here, and this does have dual motors, so it has full vibration. It has this extra button here, a headphone jack, and it looks like the D-pad has some macro functionality as well. There is PDP Control Hub software that you can download for both the Xbox and the PC, and I'll show you that a little bit later in the video, but let's pop this bad boy open and see what's inside the box. Okay, so it looks like you got your standard controller hub, software information packet, as well as some instructions. You've got a mini USB or micro USB cable, and this is the controller itself. As you can see, it looks really nice. It does feel light in the hands. It's got this extra button. I don't know what that does yet. And it does have the share button, which is new to the Series X and S consoles. The analog triggers already feel great. Sticks feel pretty good. I'm not sure about that click. It is pretty loud. Again, there is no battery on this because it's not wireless. It gets its power when it's plugged in via USB. Now, for comparison's sake, this is a standard Xbox One controller. You can see that size-wise, they are nearly identical. And then this is a Series console controller. This does have the share button, and size-wise, again, they're about the same. Now, the X button doesn't light up on this one. It is just like a rubber button that sits in place. So the analog stick thickness and height, to my eye, appear to be about the same. And again, just overall size comparison, they're pretty much identical. The standard Xbox One controller comes in at around 233 grams here when it comes to weight. I think this one does feel lighter, so I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, it comes in at 215, so it is much lighter. And that's because it doesn't have a battery compartment. It is a wired controller. The Series S and X controller, especially this one, is going to weigh more because it has the leather on the back. This one comes in at 251 grams. So as far as setup is concerned, this is ridiculously simple to set up. All you do is literally take your USB cable that is plugged into your gaming PC, plug the other end in the controller, and you're good to go. The X button doesn't light up, but there is a light on top. It's an indicator. You just hit the X button and it immediately, Windows will recognize it as an Xbox controller. It is super responsive right out of the box. There's no driver installation, nothing that you have to do. So one thing I wanted to test out in this controller is whether or not it had haptic triggers. Microsoft calls them impulse triggers, but essentially we're all familiar with the concept of vibration in a controller. This is haptic feedback specifically for the triggers. So when you're driving a racing game, for example, and you're driving over gravel or dirt, it gives each trigger individually a sense of feedback or immediate response. Anyone who has a PlayStation 5 controller knows what I'm talking about. Because the entire controller has haptic feedback. Only the triggers have them on Xbox. This video will give you more information.
Dan, we're here to talk about one of the most exciting features of Xbox One, and this is the concept of the impulse triggers. Before we get started though, how would you describe it?
Well, haptics, which is the study of how your hands actually interact with these digital worlds, that feedback, it's something we're really interested in at Forza Motorsport. We found that we can make players better using rumble. So we've had rumble obviously for a long time, but these new impulse triggers are putting rumble in each one of your hands under your fingers. So you're getting impulses in the actual trigger itself. And that gives us a way to give people feedback they've never had before.
So at this price point, I doubt that the controller has haptics and the triggers for $25, but if you go over to the website here, you can see that it has a ton of features. There is software you can download where you can customize the trigger sensitivity, you can swap the thumbsticks out, you can manually change the dead zone irrespective of the game settings, you can manage audio settings. So with all of these different options, I was hopeful. So the first game I wanted to try out to test whether or not it had haptic was Forza Horizon 5, because it's one of the only games I know of that takes advantage of it. And as I'm playing this, I can tell right off the bat that unfortunately the triggers do not have the haptic feedback. That said, it feels amazing with this game. The analog sticks have a perfect amount of tension, the buttons are super responsive, and although the triggers don't have haptic feedback, the controller itself still does have rumble on both sides, just not in the triggers specifically, but overall, as I'm playing this, it feels fantastic, and I'm really, really happy with it. The next game I want to test out is Rainbow Six Siege. The reason I wanted to test this one out is because this game is notoriously good at finding out whether or not your controller sucks. If you set the dead zone to 0 in this game, you'll often find that the sticks will have controller drift. And so far I'm playing this, I put the dead zone all the way on 0, absolutely no drift whatsoever. This feels really, really, really good. Again, the only issue I have is that when you press down on the analog stick, it is quite loud, and I'll show you a better example of that a little bit later, but overall the controller feels great with this game. The next game I want to take a look at is called Chorus. This is an action-adventure, like a space flight simulator. And these games are great with controllers, but your analog sticks have to have a good amount of tension to them in order to navigate these tight spaces. So this is one that I always like to test out with a controller.
Nara, I was thinking, all these years I've never seen you afraid of anything. And the way you fight, precise, deadly. You could earn a
So
fortune
most of the
anywhere
games that I'm playing on PC, I'm playing with a mouse and keyboard. I'm not using a controller to begin with the exception of certain genres, like racing games, fighting games, or these kind of flight sim games. Sometimes I will use a controller, and I gotta tell you, so far this feels amazing. I'm really, really impressed with the way this controller feels, especially for the price point. So is not having haptic feedback on the triggers a deal breaker? Absolutely not, and I'll tell you why, because sadly nobody uses them. Almost all the games that I play use standard rumble. The only game that I've ever personally owned that takes advantage of the haptic or impulse triggers is Forza Horizon. Every other game I've played on Xbox just uses them it uses the standard rumble features, and sadly none of them take advantage of those capabilities. So while it is nice to have, it's not a deal breaker. As I mentioned before, one of my only gripes with the controller is the sound of the sticks when you click them in. They are quite loud. In addition to that, the face buttons are a little easier to press on the official Microsoft one. You have to give it a bit more force. My only other gripe with this controller is that the thumbsticks are completely smooth. They don't have any kind of textured grip. If we look over at the official Microsoft controller, you see that it's got this textured grip, and that grip is really nice. That's the only other negative I'll say about this controller. Otherwise, I really like it. Overall, those are really minor gripes, guys. Now, earlier I mentioned that this controller does come with software, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into it now, and we'll take a look at this together to see what you can do. It immediately recognized my controller, so we'll just click on here, and it's telling me that my controller needs a firmware update, so we'll go ahead and do this. Now, again, this software is available on PC and for Xbox, so even if a game doesn't support a specific controller layout, you can force it to support it through this software, which is awesome. I know a lot of people that they're like left-handed, or they have specific needs, or they want to invert their controllers, or they want to swap the sticks, or change the dead zone or sensitivity. This lets you do all of that. So when we jump in here, we can take a look at some of the settings here. It looks like the macro buttons on the D-pad let you control audio. So if you have like a headset plugged in, you can increase the audio by hitting up or down on the D-pad in certain games in combination with other buttons. Here's some of the audio settings. Here's some of the triggers. Let's go in here. So it looks like you can swap the triggers. So you can swap the triggers entirely. You can test the dead zone or functionality here. I'm pressing in on both. And you can adjust the sensitivity. There's also the ability to remap controllers and change the strength of the vibration. It looks like it's already on the maximum here. And then you can also swap out individual buttons on each controller. Again, all of this is really impressive, especially considering the price point. So I'm going to go ahead and test my sticks here. You can see there's no dead zone whatsoever. They're staying completely dead center. And you don't get this kind of support at $25, or even at their full retail price of $34.99. This is just an amazing controller. Is it better than the official Microsoft controller? Absolutely not. Is it the best third-party Xbox or PC controller ever made? No. But is it the best budget controller I have personally ever used for Xbox or for PC? Yes, without a doubt, absolutely. You are not going to find another controller at this price point that feels this good and it has this much functionality. And this isn't some cheap Chinese knockoff. This is officially licensed by Microsoft, and I've tested it, as I mentioned before, with Steam, with Uplay, with Xbox Game Pass on PC, and everything picked it up immediately without issue. Highly recommend this. Guys, if this review was helpful for you, please like the video, leave a comment if you could. Let me know what you think about the controller if you have it, and as always, thanks for watching.